You're listening to The Pulse on AMI Audio. I'm Grant Hardy. Once a week, I'm going to speak with advocates from around the disability community about the topics that matter most. If you're listening on AMI Audio, today's episode will repeat every 6 hours until tomorrow. Plus, our show is available wherever you get your podcasts. On the show this week, the CNIB's Get On Board campaign is tackling 10 new communities this fall and is imploring the community to get involved with their secret rider survey. Here to tell us more about the campaign is Stephanie Pilon, the Manager of Advocacy and Campaigns at the CNIB. Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us today on The Pulse. And just to kick things off, if you could kind of introduce yourself, tell me a little bit about your role with CNIB.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Grant. So I am currently working as the manager for advocacy and campaigns at CNIB. I've worked with CNIB for quite a while now. I've been around since 2018 in a variety of roles. So when I first started my journey with CNIB, I was actually doing children and youth programs, and I've been working for the advocacy team now for the past 2 years, and I've been working in my current role for just under a year now. So my
All right.
responsibilities at CNIB, I have a couple of different things that I'm responsible for. So one is national guide dog advocacy. So I do all of the national advocacy for guide dog handlers across the country. So sometimes that looks like working on individual advocacy issues with folks. Other times that looks like more systemic things, working on things like public awareness. We just finished up our Guide Dog Access Month campaign in September, so I was responsible for a lot of those deliverables for that campaign. And I also we have an annual Guide Dog Camp every year in June, so organize that as well as Guide Dog Access Month, as I've mentioned. The other
Mhm.
side of my job is working with national campaigns, and a lot of the ones that I work on are to do with our Safe and Accessible Journeys initiative, including our Get On Board campaign, our snow removal campaign, which we're going to be gearing up for in January. So lots of different things going on. We've got a very busy advocacy team at CNIB.
Brilliant. And we're going to be talking more about transportation specifically today. But when you just think about your role, we're so far from, equitable access for blind Canadians. So how do you kind of prioritize what issues you need to work on first?
For sure. So our team looks at a couple of different things. One being community feedback. So a lot of our strategic plan, as many may know, came. A lot of the initiatives that we have under our strategic plan came from feedback we received from the community. So that's
Mhm.
really important to us. Is learning what's going on in the communities across Canada, learning what people's challenges are. So we really love hearing from people and knowing what's going on out there so that we can look at what needs to be done. Sometimes there are other things as well. So, for example, if there's an election in a province, that might change kind of the priorities that we look at in that province, because we're going to be looking at what we can do, what kinds of things we can be drawing attention to as people gear up to either start new roles as elected officials or as they're kind of moving out. So may look at those kinds of things and just kind of things going on. So there's a number of kind of ways that we choose priorities. The other thing is that in some local areas there might be things in that particular area. So if there's a specific community where there is a very challenging issue, that particular advocacy lead may be working on local priorities in addition to our national ones. So
For
it really kind
sure.
of depends what's going on in the area where you are and what the
Mhm.
priorities are for that community.
Well, I guess one thing that is pretty consistent across the board that we all sort of need is transportation. So that's going to affect pretty much every blind and partially sighted Canadian. So let's talk a little bit about the Get On Board campaign and what it is and how CNIB clients can participate.
Absolutely, and you're absolutely right. Definitely, as someone who is blind and has been since birth, I can attest to the fact that transportation is super important. So, to that end, last year we started with the first phase of our Get On Board campaign. And that was where we were advocating and still are advocating for accessible public transit systems across the country. So the campaign has rolled out in 3 phases. So the first phase was in fall of last year, 2023. We did a second kind of phase of the campaign this past spring, and then the third phase is just wrapping up now in the fall. And so when we're kind of working on these campaigns, there are 3 components that happen. So the first is ride-alongs. So we do ride-alongs with people who are blind or partially sighted with government officials, and so it really gives government officials that kind of look, day in the life of, if you will, of somebody who is blind or partially sighted in the community. So we select communities for each phase. We selected communities across Canada in which to run the campaign. So the ride-alongs is the first component of that campaign.
Mhm.
The second component is the secret rider survey. So what that looks like is we have a survey that is available on the website and has been for each of the phases of the campaign. And members in the selected communities are encouraged to go and fill out that survey. And what it kind of does is it is an opportunity for people to share in an anonymous way their
Mhm.
feedback about the public transit system where they are. So looking at things like built environment, looking at things like customer service, the website, that kind of thing. So they're able to share those things through the survey. And the third component of the campaign is the town halls that we've done across the country, and those look different depending on where you are, but usually what it is an in-person event where customers who are blind or partially sighted, people that live in the community and are customers of the transit system, get to meet with public officials and transit officials to share feedback and to share, in a lot of cases, the results of the survey. So
Mhm.
depending on how many surveys were filled out in the community, if there was only 1 or 2, it's a little difficult to give statistics
Mhm.
on those types of things. But if there were enough surveys filled out to kind of give a picture of what things look like, then we can say things like, hey, your customer service is rated really high, but maybe we need to work on some things around the bus announcements or the built environment. So that is kind of what the campaign looks like. It looks a little different in every region and in every city where we've done it. But so far, including the ones that are just wrapping up now, we've done 33 across Canada over the 3 phases that we've done. So we've been to many different communities with this campaign.
Brilliant. And if I could just throw this one out there, how do you find decision makers um, are reacting either to the town halls, the ride-alongs? How do you feel people? Do you feel people really care about the issues that you're trying to bring up? Do people feel a little bit closer after they've had some of those experiences?
Absolutely. So I think one of the challenges around basically raising awareness for those of us who are blind or partially
Mhm.
sighted is that decision makers often either don't know or forget. And so having that ability to meet with somebody, to be on the bus with someone who is blind and seeing, things maybe not going so well
Mhm.
in that situation, or sitting down with a group of people who are blind and really talking out the issues. So I'll give a couple of examples. So for example, in Camrose, that was one that we've just wrapped up in Alberta. They did not have stop announcements
Mhm.
previous to the Get On Board campaign. There were no stop announcements. So now there aren't automated ones, but the drivers have been asked to call the stops. And our program lead I was just in a meeting with her today, and she was saying that that has continued even after, the town hall wrapped up and the Get On Board campaign was done. So sometimes it really is just a matter of raising awareness. Another example from a past campaign in Greater Sudbury, we had a town hall for Sudbury, and we met with, it was a fairly small group of participants, but who were blind. And we met with an individual who was in charge of the transit system. And we were talking about signage because one of the challenges in the community, and I'm based in Sudbury, and one
Hmm.
of the challenges here is that all the bus signs look different and they're kind of all over the place. So they're very difficult to find. So if you're looking for a bus stop, you don't always really know what you're looking for. And as a result, the city has committed to changing all of the signage. There's going to be QR codes on the signs and larger font, and they're all going to look the same. So it's going to be much easier for us to be able to find those signs. So not only is it a really good, it opens, it really opens the conversations with government officials, but it can result in actual changes in some cases, even if maybe it takes a little bit of time, but it's a good conversation starter and a really great way to build relationships.
Yeah, for sure. And you know what I find so intriguing too is just the fact that, as someone who also experiences or identifies as being totally blind, I find it really intriguing how just the mainstream sighted people find that accessible stop call outs or more accessible signage to be very beneficial as well in
Exactly.
more unfamiliar areas. So it just goes to show that improving accessibility really makes things more equitable for everybody.
Absolutely. I remember being in Ottawa a few years ago on a bus, and somebody saying that they really liked the announcements because they were tourists. They were like new to the city, and they appreciated having that like kind of announcement as to where they were and to know what to look for. So anyone can benefit from a lot of these features, not just those of us who
Mhm.
are blind.
So I know that the types of barriers that one will experience are very local. That
Mhm.
definitely in a big city versus a small town, your experience is going to be very different. But I'm just curious, what are some of the barriers that are most difficult for you that you've experienced, or even just most puzzling? You know, like something that's kind of baffling why it is there.
People with and this is maybe a me thing. This is not necessarily based on but I have definitely heard this from other people as well, and seen it, but around accessible seating on buses, so where they've got the seats in front that are reserved
Hmm.
for folks who are in wheelchairs or people who are blind, and you've got people with strollers who for some reason decide that, like, no, this is actually meant for me. And like, I've been asked to move from that seating where I'm sitting there with a guide dog, and I'm asked to move because somebody with a stroller wants to use that space, and it's like, that is not what that's meant for. And I think a lot of the things that I've heard from other people are, a lot of it is around attitudinal barriers, around people just not knowing what to do around people who are blind, or assuming things about people who are blind. So I hear a lot. I don't have this issue kind of myself because I'm totally blind. So
Hmm.
the fact that I'm blind is very visible. But for a lot of people, one of the challenges is that they may be asking for some assistance, and people are saying, well, you don't look blind, because they're, I don't know what somebody blind is supposed to look like, but I guess they don't they don't meet this person's kind of criteria of what it looks like to be blind. So a lot of it is around kind of attitudes. There are definitely some challenges around, as I mentioned, signage. Not being able to find the bus stop, or it's kind of the sign is up on a hydro pole somewhere, and it's
Hmm.
trying to find, or maybe there's not a shelter, and maybe it looks different depending on where in a community you are. So you're always kind of playing a game of where's the bus stop. So those kinds of built environment things, but really a lot of it, I think, comes down to people not knowing what to do and not knowing how to interact. And that's why it's so helpful when we can raise awareness about these issues with government officials and transit officials, so that can get passed down to drivers, and we can see some more kind of, I guess, understanding with those groups who are there to help us out.
Yeah, definitely can relate in the sense that, as someone who identifies as totally blind as well, I used to kind of like completely fold up my cane and stow it out of sight, which is my preference. And I found that that led to me being treated in a very peculiar way, with some people really questioning uh, why I was asking for certain things. Now I kind of have that cane out and very visible, which is not my preference at all.
Mhm.
But definitely imagining people who have more invisible disabilities, that disparity could be greater. So maybe that could lead us into talking about training, whether it's for physical or attitudinal barriers to be addressed. I know we've talked about this a little bit, but like what training would you advocate for?
I think it's very, very helpful when there is kind of actual exposure to actual people with disabilities. So, one of the
Mm,
things that we see sometimes is that there's an assumption that, oh, well, there are no blind people in X community, and there actually are. And
mhm,
so, raising awareness and having that ability to actually meet with somebody and learn about their experiences firsthand, that's what people remember is stories and interactions. And so I think it's really helpful when we can have somebody who actually has experience trying to access the transit system with a disability, go in and share their experiences, or even to have kind of an experiential thing like a ride along where somebody is able to interact with somebody who has a disability and actually go along with them on a journey to be able to see what it's like. Because I think a lot of times it really is a matter of opening people's eyes, maybe to use
mhm.
to the challenges that people face when we are blind or partially sighted and traveling within communities. And I don't think when we have people, I mean, there maybe are people sometimes that just aren't very nice people, but I think a lot of times what we see is just a lack of knowing what to do. And so providing that kind of actual exposure to somebody, the opportunity to ask questions is another really good thing. And I think just because there are people with a number of disabilities, and not everyone's disability is visible. So having that opportunity to maybe learn about different disabilities, and that some people may not want to have their cane out all the time, and that not all people who are blind use a cane or have a guide dog with them. So just giving a little bit more understanding as to what the community actually looks like.
Absolutely. And it's that typical riddle of kind of like people are not as exposed as they should be because things are not as accessible and people are not maybe going out as much as they would like to. And that cycle just keeps repeating itself, which is why things such as the Ride Along campaign that you're doing are really so important to just increase that awareness. Um,
Absolutely.
so, one of the things that I find the most intriguing, and maybe even a little bit of internalized ableism in the community, I'm not sure, but is the disparity between people with access and knowledge of a lot of different technology to help them kind of address some of the inaccessibility versus people who maybe don't have access to that. Do you want
Mhm.
to talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So I think there's a couple of things at play here. So one of them is of course the fact that technology can be pricey for folks, and so not everyone is going to be able to afford that technology. So really encourage people to look into things like CNIB's Phone It Forward program, trying to get access to that technology, access to some training through
Mhm.
Smart Life if you're able, and that's something that you want to do. On the other hand, though, I do think that transit authorities need to be aware that not everyone is going to have access to that technology. So having things like accessible websites that people can access from home, having numbers that people can call or text to learn what routes is also important. So we do need people to well, not need people, but we want to encourage people to learn about the technology,
Mhm.
and to learn how to use the technology. But we also, need to make sure that services are available to everybody, no matter what their ability in terms of technology. So, making sure that there are options for those who may not be as comfortable, kind of accessing those things.
Absolutely. Or it's simply not available or working at the time, depending
Exactly,
on.
because that's happened too, right? And I think there's there's always something to be said for good old fashioned O&M skills, right? Like we need our technology and we use it, and I use it for everything. Love my technology, but sometimes your phone dies, and so you do need to kind of have that ability to orient yourself or have the advocacy skills to be able to reach out and ask for help when needed, and know what the services are kind of in your community and what you might be able to access in the event that maybe that technology is not working exactly as you would like.
So true. So let's talk about accessible bus stops. This is something very new, even to me, in a very large city, Vancouver. Um, and man, they are really helpful if they are there. So let's talk about what an accessible bus stop is.
So I think one of the most important things around bus stops is people need to be able to find them. We need to have things that are cane detectable, things like cane detectable signage. We need to have signs that people, if they do have some degree of vision, are able to read. Ideally, braille for those who need them. Things like being able to safely access a stop. So things like accessible if there's a crossing that you need to use in order to get to the stop, having an accessible, an audible pedestrian signal there, making sure that people are able to access marking for the stop. So things like tactile markings, that kind of thing, so that people are able to access the stops that they need wherever they are.
Perfect. Thank you. Um, how do we deal with evolving threats there? You kind of mentioned maybe trickier intersections as
Mhm.
well. Traffic seems to be getting a lot busier, but also things like in Vancouver, we have bike lanes popping up everywhere. In many cities, they have sort of floating bus stops and involving doing a crossing kind of just as you get to the stop, maybe crossing a bus lane. I don't know. There seem to be all kinds of evolving threats, and things are getting harder in some areas rather than easier. How do we deal with that?
I think it's really a matter of not letting government officials and decision makers forget that we're here. And so I think it's really, really important for folks, if you're comfortable doing so, to get involved, learn when community meetings are, get involved with your local accessibility committees, get involved with CNIB in some cases, so that we're aware of what's going on in communities. But really, just making sure that they don't forget us, because if they don't forget us, then we can try and make sure that accessibility is built in rather than an afterthought. I think a lot of times with accessible, particularly with infrastructure, they do this fun thing where they're like, well, we're going to plan it and then we'll talk accessibility
Mhm.
after. And I think the more that we're kind of there going, but what about me? What about us? Let's make sure that this is accessible from the moment it launches. So, if they're redoing the transit system in a community, making sure that that folks who are blind or partially sighted are involved in that planning, because we really want to make sure that when things are being planned, that we're involved with that, and that we make sure that it's accessible for us from the get go. If there is something that maybe we didn't know about, because that happens, and then it just kind of is, and we aren't able to be involved with that planning, then it becomes a matter of making sure that people are aware what the challenges are, because people don't always think of things. I don't know how many times I've been talking to government officials or heard about people talking to local officials, and they say, well, I never thought of that. I remember like with the signage in Sudbury, when we were talking to the gentleman who is the director for transit, and he kept saying, well, I never thought of those things. And so making sure that we really just have to raise our voices, I think, with a lot of these things, and explain not only what the challenges are, but the why. Why is it challenging for us to access a floating bus stop or to cross a bike lane or these kinds of things, and making sure that that there's an understanding, not just that, oh, we don't like that, but why that is, and helping to be part of the solution. So not only drawing attention to what the challenge might be, but then helping, being an active part of that kind of solution, of what the solution might look like.
Okay, thanks. I really appreciate not only everything you've shared, but also just all the advocacy work you're doing. Just to end, when you think about accessible transportation, what are your dreams?
I would love to, as a blind person, and for any blind person in Canada, or really anywhere, to be able to just decide that you want to go somewhere and leave your house and get on a bus or a train or whatever it is you need to do, and access everything that we would like to access, just like somebody who is sighted. So not have to worry about, oh, well, I can't get off at that stop because it's not accessible and I won't be able to cross there. Being able to do exactly what we want when we want it, in the same way as somebody does who may not be blind or partially sighted, and having that freedom to access what we need when we need it, and being able to plan if we want to, having access to schedules and things that are accessible, but also being able to be spontaneous and say, I want to be able to go and meet a friend, and I'm able to then access the bus stops and get on the bus and have audible announcements and get off the bus and be able to walk safely where I need to go. So basically having that accessible journey from the time you leave your home to the time you return, and being able to do that without having to overthink absolutely everything. And that would be, I think, the best outcome for folks who are blind or partially sighted in Canada and around the world.
Could not agree more. Thank you so much for the fantastic work that you're doing, and thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
The CNIB wants you to take public transit and take part in their Secret Rider Survey. You can find more information about the campaign and the Secret Rider Survey at www.cnib.ca. AMI Today and The Pulse will repeat every 6 hours on AMI Audio and is available to watch again as soon as the show is over on YouTube. Plus, you can find The Pulse and AMI Today wherever you find your podcasts. I'm your host, Grant Hardy. Thank you for listening.